Welcome everybody. This is our second lecture of our series on the Goldsmith jewelry. I'm delighted to welcome you again today. And today we're going to be talking about the relationship between master and apprentice. And we have Sam Marsden and Louise Sorrel, who are our master and apprentice, and we're going to listen to their story and learn all about their experience. But before we get there, the historical aspect of master and apprentice is really important. And our favorite historian, Eleni Bide, who has really delighted us with stories for the past two lectures, is going to start and tell us how it all began and the meaning of that relationship between master and apprentice. Eleni.
Hello. And, well, I was going to say good evening. This is good evening from London, and perhaps good afternoon, good morning possibly to everyone else. Now, if we're thinking about a masterpiece of goldsmithing, initially what we consider is the dazzle and the beauty and the finesse of its surface. But underneath that wonderful materiality of the object is the story of how its creator gained the incredible skills necessary to make it. And like all good stories, that story involves a long and arduous trek, often over a lot of time, to eventually reach the prize. And this is the journey that a Goldsmiths Company apprentice has to go on. Now, learning how to create a masterpiece takes time, it takes dedication, and it takes access, crucially, to an experienced teacher. Very difficult to learn these things on your own. And for goldsmithing, these three elements can be found in the traditional apprenticeship. Now, this is a form of education which has really ancient roots, but it's still highly relevant for today's craftspeople. And in fact, the very first page of the Goldsmiths Company's earliest set of records in 1334 contains the names of apprentices bound to their masters. It goes right back to the very beginnings of the Goldsmiths Company, and also how the trade of goldsmithing and silversmithing was managed in Britain in the medieval period. And one of the things you might have noticed is this strange word bound. Apprentices are bound to their masters. Now, what does that mean? Now, this relates to the binding ceremony, which is where the apprentice formally agrees to serve their master and to learn from them. And it involves swearing a declaration, a promise that you intend to serve and learn from your master for a fixed period of time. And it also frequently involves, or did involve, certainly back in centuries gone by, signing an indenture. And this is a formal legal document that you and your master both sign. And frequently, if anyone's ever seen one of these fascinating things, they come in two halves. There's like a zigzag down the middle sometimes, which means that the apprentice has one half, the master has the other. And if you want to, you can actually fit them together like two halves of the jigsaw puzzle. Now, the binding ceremony today, which all goldsmiths apprentices have to go through, still involves signing your name in the company's apprentice book. We're now on apprentice book 12, and this is something that Louise will have to do at some stage. Our first apprentice book was started in 1578, and I might show you, if we have time, a picture of that a little later on. But one of the points, one of the objects of having apprentices sign this apprentice book was to test their literacy, to test whether they can read or write. Because one of our earliest rules from about 1401 actually specifies that Goldsmiths Company's apprentices have to be literate. And in the medieval period, this was really quite a rare skill. Normally, it was only the upper echelons of society who could read or write. This was not necessarily something that you'd find amongst people who practiced artisanal trades, but it was a marker of how complex, how important goldsmithing was, and in fact is. These are still things that modern goldsmiths and silversmiths have to deal with. You're dealing with very high value materials, and you are also thinking about engineering and design, many different aspects. So you can see there's a high degree of education and learning is really important. We do have some apprentices in our records who couldn't read and write. We know this because they signed their name with an X rather than with a signature. Some of these apprentices are often orphans, and sometimes extra years are added on to the term of their apprenticeship to give them extra time to learn these key literacy skills. Now, I mentioned time, so how long does it take to do an apprenticeship? Well, how long does it take to do it in the past anyway? Now, our earliest records say 10 years, so that's an incredibly long time, and you would start young. You would start at around the age of 10 or 11. But this quickly became standardized to 7 years, and typically you might start an apprenticeship when you are around the age of 14, and you might finish your training when you're around 21, which is the traditional age of majority, when you become officially and legally an adult for much of Britain's history. Now, bear in mind, this age, 14, you really are still a child, and this is a massive and scary thing to undertake. You are often travelling to London, which is a big and dangerous city, from your hometown, which might be many hundreds of miles away, to live with a new family, maybe with people that you've never met before in your life, and you're signing your life away almost quite literally for a long period of time. So there's a mixture of excitement and also danger as well at the start of this apprenticeship. And when we're thinking about this dangerous journey, this long and hard and arduous journey of training that has to be undertaken, and I think that's something to remember. And one of the things that's always rather horrifying is when we look through our records and we see how many apprentices, maybe in periods like the 17th century, where you have great instances of the plague, for example, didn't finish. And maybe some of them got bored, maybe some of them ran away. A lot of them would have died. So it's a high-risk activity coming and to a big city to try and learn your trade. But how did they learn? Now, apprentices would have learned in the past, and I'm sure there might be parallels with this today as well, with first getting used to the workshop and running errands, carrying out quite basic tasks, but just making sure they're familiarised with the trade that they're pursuing. They then would be given ever more complex technical tasks to undertake as part of the work for their master. This could be very repetitious, but that repetition is a really important part of learning. By doing it again and again and again, you finesse your skills, and that's how you become a master. That's how you become absolutely in control of the technique that you're undergoing. I can remember interviewing someone called Paul Podolsky, who was a master in his own right and also had trained at his father's workshop, remembering the horror at having to make 500 gold wedding rings for one of his first jobs. But he said he was very good at it once he finished. So once you've done that, you've undergone many arduous years of training, you would be asked to create your masterpiece. And again, this is something that still is very relevant for the apprentices that are trained today through the Goldsmiths Company. And you would take this to Goldsmiths Hall for inspections by the wardens of the Goldsmiths Company. And if it passes muster, then you're made free of the company and you're released from your apprenticeship. You think you're bound to your master, you're committed legally to serve them, this is your release, and you can then go off and in fact become a master in your own right. So this is one of the really important things that completing your apprenticeship and freedom gives you, as well as traditionally it gives you a lot of rights within the legal rights within the City of London, less relevant now. Also it's a qualification. It proves to everyone that you really do know your stuff, but it also is the thing that might in the past have led you to become a master in your own right. Now, some things have definitely changed. A typical apprenticeship now might last between 3 and 5 years, and I'm sure we'll learn what Louise's story might be a bit later, but that's something to really bear in mind. That is at least as long, if not longer, than the normal undergraduate degree. So this is a really intense, high, thorough level of training. Again, you have the time to really get to grips with what you're doing. Unlike previous apprentices as well, you probably will be supplementing your education today with on the job learning with your master, with also specialist supervision at the Goldsmiths Centre. And this is to ensure that all apprentices have a really well-rounded understanding of lots of different elements of the craft. So, for example, you might be apprenticed as a diamond mounter, and your work with your master will mean you are absolutely brilliant at diamond mounting. But in order to make sure that all of our apprentices nowadays can have a basic understanding of things like enamelling, raising with silver, engraving, whatever it might be, there's extra tuition as well. Now, fortunately for modern apprentices too, they're unlikely to have to do some of the more horrible things that they might have had to do for their masters in times gone by. Sleeping under your master's bench was a traditional trope. I'm not sure how many apprentices really had to do that. But if you think that, you know, individual bedrooms were very rare in the medieval period, then I'm sure some of them did in the past. Today's apprentices are more likely to get paid, and also they are less likely to undergo some of the rather harsh punishments that were meted out to some of their predecessors. But I like to think that they're better behaved as well. I was going to share one with you. This is one of my favourites. So our records often have accounts of when masters and apprentices have been in dispute, because this is how in the past we ensured that the training was going well. If anyone was unhappy, then they would come to the wardens and, you know, air their grievances. And in the 16th century, we have one Edward Shotbolt, who was put in the stocks, and things were thrown at him because he'd stolen from his master, because he'd fallen in love and wanted to impress this girl, and therefore needed money to buy her fine clothes. Now, the good news is, this is not pastoral care that I think we would advocate nowadays, but he did actually go on to complete his apprenticeship and become free. So, you know, after the punishment was meted out, he learnt the error of his ways. He was able to get back to his education, which I think is a nice story. But despite these differences, apprentices nowadays do have lots and lots in common with their predecessors. And I think the most important really is the hundreds of hours they have to spend at the bench, patiently honing their skills and learning invention and problem solving along the way as well. And crucially, they're doing this by doing. This is the essence of the nature of apprenticeship. You're not, although, you know, books might be important, and there are lots of learning resources out there, it's a practical way of learning, and this is what makes it unique and also so powerful in terms of passing on craft skills. The other thing to remember, of course, is crucially these apprentices today are guided by their masters, whose job it is to pass on decades of experience, while also managing the tricky balancing act of giving their apprentices enough freedom to develop on their own as well. And this is something that lots of masters talk about, all of this accumulated experience that they have within them, and that represent not just their work over their lifetime, but perhaps the work of their master as well. So we're looking at perhaps not decades, but hundreds of years worth of experience. And how can you possibly pass this on? It's quite a big burden, actually, in some respects. And an apprenticeship gives you a method that, say, distilling it in a book, you would just never be able to achieve, in terms of actually making sure that some of these amazing skills continue. I think, lest we forget, masters also have to run their own business at the same time. So we're again thinking about what continuity you have with the past, also what those challenges are. It's the teaching, it's the incredible depth of, I suppose, skill and learning that you have to undergo as an apprentice, as a master. And it's the fact that while all of this is going on, unlike in a college or a university, there's a business and people have to make sure that that business is working simultaneously. So there are a lot of things to juggle all at once. Now, I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that really intense and amazing master-apprenticeship relationship in real life very shortly. But if you like, I can just share with you some pictures of some of the things that I've been talking about. Would that be all right, Isabel?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Right, let's just have a very quick look. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And what you can see here is I mentioned our first apprentice book, so it's Apprentice Book 1, and here you can see the very beginning of it, and you can see 1578 here, written nice and clearly, and you can see at the top, this book is called the Dormond, and we've puzzled over why the first apprentice book is called the Dormond, and we think it's because possibly it was meant to lie dormant in Goldsmiths Hall, which we understand to mean it's always supposed to be there. It should always be ready for consultation in case anyone needed to look at it. Fantastic handwriting there. And then I'm just going to move on to our next thing. Now, this is one of our favourites. This is in terms of telling a story about an individual. This is the Apprentice Declaration by Roland Lockie. You can see the date down the bottom there, 1581. So that gives you an idea. It's one of the earliest that we have actually written in this first apprentice book. And the great thing is you can read Roland's handwriting. If you look at it hard, and lots of these people you can't at all, but you can see he's the son of Leonard Lockie of St Bride's in Fleet Street, who was a crossbow maker, a fantastic profession to have. And he put himself apprenticed to Nicholas Hilliard for the term of 8 years. Now, Nicholas Hilliard, some of you I'm sure will know, was a very famous miniature painter as well as a goldsmith. So Roland actually learned a bit of goldsmithing, but also painting as well. So it shows you the breadth of things you might be able to learn. And again, if we're thinking about this moment where you're a young person, you're just starting your apprenticeship, it's really it's a scary thing, and you're at the cusp of something terrifying but also wonderful. I think seeing some of these entries, looking at the handwriting, takes you straight into the emotional work that it must be that apprentice hundreds of years ago, and to a certain extent today as well. So I'm sure Louise has more to say about that. Now, I have more images, but I think I might give Isabel the opportunity to move this on, if you would like, Isabel.
Sure. Thank you so much, Eleni. Are there any questions for Eleni before we move on to Sam and Louise? I don't see any questions. Great. Yes, Laura, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Just a quick question. How long did it take you to learn to read these documents? Because, you know, it does, just looking at them, you can kind of grasp it, but, you know, some of the spellings and everything, or do you just get used to it quite quickly? Once you look at enough documents, you kind of...
Well, I shall let you into a terrible secret, and that is I can't read all of them. You're absolutely right. You need to practice it. So there are, for periods that we look at more frequently, then we get used to the handwriting and also some of the words used, and you can read them more easily. But for others, you really have to get your eye in. And it's written in other languages as well. So if it's written in Latin, for example, or Anglo-Norman French, then that's a really special skill.
There's a question in the chat box. When were girls permitted to be an apprentice?
Now this is a really interesting question, and we touched on it a little bit last week. So there is nothing officially in our records in our medieval records, I should say, about women being allowed to be an apprentice. So there are about 168 girls who are bound as apprentices by the Goldsmiths Company between roughly about the 17th century into the 19th century. So that's not many, 168, but nevertheless, you know, there's a presence. They stopped in the Victorian period because the cultural mores of the 19th century were really worked against women participating in the world of work. And so this is something that you then didn't see for about over 100 years until we get to the 1980s, and we have Wendy Cooke, who is the first woman to be bound as an apprentice, and then she's made free by service in 1983, and she's an engraver.
Okay. I can't see everybody on my screen. So if you have a question, it was lucky that Laura is on my screen, but if you have a question, please put it in the chat because I can't see you all. And if you're just raising your hand on the screen, I might miss you. Thank you so much, Eleni. So we're now going to move on to Sam and Louise. So I can't see Sam. Sam, do you want to say hello? So you're going to come up on the screen.
Can you hear me?
Ah, here we are. Wonderful. So Sam and Louise, you are bound to each other, which is, as I was saying earlier, an extraordinary word to use in a context. Before we get there, why don't we hear your story? Let's start with you, Sam, since you're the master. Maybe it's fitting that I should give you the mic first. Tell us a little bit how you came into being a silversmith and an engraver.
Hello, everybody. My story started with my family. My family are gun makers and have been since the 1700s. So whilst I was at school, I wasn't really interested in that world. I actually wanted to be a pathologist. And so I took all the science subjects and that was what I was going to do. But when it came to leaving school and following that particular path, I changed my mind and thought I would actually really rather like to be a gun engraver, and I'd been kicking and screaming against it because I knew that's what my father had wanted me to do really. But I gave into it. And I then went off to all the major gun houses in London, Holland and Holland, James Purdy, looking for an apprenticeship. But I hit a stone wall, and that was because I was a girl. And they didn't take any girl apprentices back in the 80s, and in fact they didn't even have any women working in their factories at all. Not you know, there were no female facilities at all.
How are they doing now? Have they come into our century, or are we still not?
No. They have now. I know Holland and Holland have taken on girl apprentices, but probably in the last 10 years. Yeah.
Right.
And so from there, I was directed to art school, where they were running a pre-apprenticeship course and a strong cast art. And so I went along there and did the pre-apprenticeship course for a year. And I was just so lucky in that time that my master was looking for an apprentice and came to the art school. And it was just a very good coincidence that I was there. But again, he came looking for a boy, and he came looking for a right-hander. And I'm obviously a girl and a left-hander. Battled through that and ended up becoming his apprentice.
Right.
And I stayed with him for 18 years. I finished my apprenticeship and then went into business with him. He actually asked me if I'd go into partnership with him. And I was with him for very many years until I then had a family and we parted ways. And then I set up another company with my business partner, James, in the Goldsmiths Centre.
Right. Okay. Louise, what about you? How did you come into engraving and being bound to Sam? Do you want to share your story a little bit there?
Yeah, so I also come from a family of gun makers. So my dad and my granddad were both gun makers. So we've always had shotguns that have been engraved in the house since I was little. And I've always been quite arty as well. So I saw those and thought, wow, I'd really like to be able to do that. Because it's so cool. And so I went through the path of doing all the arty subjects through school. I had 3 potential jobs lined up. So they were a social worker,
Right.
or which I would really enjoy to help people, but I know the pay is not particularly good in the care sector.
Right.
My second choice was an accountant, which would be good money, but it'd probably get a bit tedious or boring. It's
Boring.
just numbers. And then my third choice was an engraver. So that was, I wasn't sure on the money, but I would definitely be interested, because it's, you know, something arty that I've always loved. And so I did the relevant choices through school, did all the arts, went to college for my first year. I did art, psychology, and health and social care to cover all the potential job opportunities. And then at the end of my first year, I spoke to my dad, who put me in contact with Sam, because our dad spoke. And so she invited me up to London to the workshop to have an interview to see if I was any good. And I guess I was, because she took me on as an apprentice in, I think, 2014. That's not definite. So I've been with her since then,
Right.
which is great.
So when we had a little chat a couple of weeks ago to get to know each other in preparation of today, Sam, you said that you knew immediately that Louise was the real deal. How did you know that? What are you looking for as a master in your apprentice?
Well, I not only have I had apprentices, but I used to also teach at Sir John Cafe. So I've had quite a lot of people come through my door wanting to be engravers. And so I kind of realised quite quickly that it was very apparent if someone was going to be the right kind of person. And the right kind of person is a combination of artistry skills. That is number one requirement, and I could see from her portfolio that she could draw. And secondly, patience, to be able to sit and to be calm. And she also had that, obviously. And I think you're just born with, well, I don't think you can develop skills, but she seemed to be very natural when she first sat down at the bench. She picked up the graver. It was just a very natural thing for her to do right from the offset.
Mm. So it was just a very natural bonding. I would say.
Yeah. It's very obvious when it's right.
Yeah. And that is really important, because you really spend 5 years, I guess, together side by side.
Yeah.
So the chemistry has to be important.
Again, yes, that's a huge factor. A huge factor. We've got quite a few people in the workshop, and we do. Well, I like to think that we are a family, and we all get on really well, and I think that's extremely important to your success as well. Everybody supports each other. Everybody's willing to help and show their own skills that they've acquired, or a tool they found that they really enjoy. So yeah, it's all part and parcel of becoming a good craftsman, being in a good working environment.
Yeah, it seems that the generosity of spirit is really the foundation of the system, the principle. Because if you're not generous in sharing what you know, it just doesn't work. Is that right?
Absolutely not. And that's my number one priority, is to really share everything I've learned. I had a fantastic master who was so generous to me. And that isn't always the case, unfortunately. There's a lot of professional jealousy, and a lot of masters don't always teach everything, because they want to hold a little bit back for themselves. And I think that's the fear, that the apprentice is going to finish their time and they're going to leave and they're going to set up their own business. And so I understand it. But I've never worried about that. I've always felt it's extremely important to give with an open heart and show everything that you've learned. Pass it on.
Yeah, are you already able to start sharing some of the knowledge you've acquired, or maybe, I mean, you're mostly learning right now, but in such a collaborative environment, do you feel that you can share some of your things that you've learned?
I've done, I think, one teaching day, and it was really interesting. And me and Sam also did a different lecture, which was at the Goldsmiths Centre. So that was kind of teaching the audience that was there how that we engrave, and I thought it was a really interesting experience because you have the skill of engraving itself, but there's also the skill of passing on the skill, which is extremely important for when you're older and you're a master of the trade. So I can pass on some. Obviously, I'm not nowhere near as good as Sam.
But
but yeah.
We have a young apprentice who's just started with us now, who sits next to Louise. Well, eventually will, when this is all nightmare is all over. She'll be sitting next to Louise, and Louise will be certainly helping her along as well.
Right. We have a comment here from Charlotte, who says, I often use Sam James engraving and they are brilliant. Can't recommend enough.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's nice.
See you later.
Actually, now that's a great segue into, I'd like to show some of the work you do, because you sent me tons of photos of the work you do, and I was absolutely blown away by the minutiae, how detailed and incredibly small each mark is. We have a question before we go to that from Woodham. I'm sorry, I don't know what the first name is. How old do you have to be an apprentice?
I think it's 16. No, it was 16. I think it's now 17. I think you have to be in full-time education until you're 17 now. Please.
I think it's 18 now.
Is it 18 now?
I think it's 18 now, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
And they'd like you to finish your, well, they always used to like you to finish your apprenticeship by the age of 21.
Right.
And that's probably more as well, I'm sure. Elena, you know better than I.
Wendy says it's 18 now, so here we are. Well, maybe let's go on to that question. When is there a formal curriculum and that you have to complete, and when it's completed, you graduate, or is it very much the master who says you are ready or you are not?
Right from the beginning of the apprenticeship, you have a period of time. So Louise was 4 years with me. Generally, it's 5 years. You do a year at the Goldsmiths Institute first, which you cover a little bit of everything, a little bit of silversmithing, a little bit of enameling, a little bit of design, and then you go off to your prospective workshops and do your 4-year apprenticeship. Lou skipped the first year; she came straight to us. So yeah, it was a 4-year agreement, binding, and you just slowly work your way through the tasks until you build up quite a good understanding of the art.
Right. Sam James, everybody is expecting a male to answer to the name. Now, I know that it's a mix of your first name and your business partner last name, but you touched a bit on the gender bias, certainly in the gun making world. What about in the engraving or the jewelry world? How does that? Have you experienced it? Do you less now than before? How is that working?
I think it's mixed. I think I've been very lucky. I think when I first started my apprenticeship, there were hardly any girls at all, and we'd go to the annual competition, which the Goldsmiths company host, and I'd go up to get my award, and I think I was the only girl there back in the 80s. So that has changed.
Sorry to interrupt. You were the first one. You were the first woman to win the Cartier Award, aren't you?
Yes, the first woman, and now I've won it twice. Yeah. So that was a great accolade. Yeah, very, very. Yeah, I was very delighted about that. My master won it when he was the youngest one to have ever won it at the age of 19. So I always wanted to win it, and to have got it and then to have won it again is very special, very special. But yes, nowadays I would probably say 50% of the people at the competition are female. So it's a huge change. But I was always judged by what I did. Luckily, I found in later years now, people come into the workshop, they expect me to be a man with my name. But generally, I've been quite lucky. I've not really had to put up with any prejudice of any sort being a woman, I have to say.
Well, that's good news. It means that the Goldsmith is doing a good job, I guess, of
they are a very progressive company. I've always, definitely
promoting diversity.
Delivery companies. My father is a member of the gun makers, and they do have livery women now, but they certainly didn't for years and years. Where the Goldsmiths company have always, in my lifetime, have always been very progressive.
Well, so Erica, who's in the audience, let me know that there is a Lady Master Association. Do you belong to that? Clearly not. And it's an association of ladies who are master and who have also occupied positions in the various livery companies. And Erica actually just put a comment saying the gun makers have a female master.
They do, and she's lovely. I've met her.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So it looks like women are getting organized and uniting to protect the patch and to grow the influence. Let's go back. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen because I would love to show both your work and Louise's work. Bear with me because Isabel says that she's an engineer and a past master engineer. So here we are, and that's wonderful to have such stories. So here we are. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes? Wonderful. So what are we looking at here, Louise?
So this was the beginning of last year when I had finished my masterpiece and had put it into the yearly Goldsmiths Craft and Design Council competition. And this is after the awards have been read out. That's why I'm so happy. I won for that piece. I won the gold in engraving juniors. I won the overall junior for that one as well as the master and apprentice award by Theo Fennell.
Right.
Well, we won. We won the master and apprentice award.
So we're going to come to your piece, but I wanted to show first, Sam, can you describe from a technical point of view what it is that we're looking at here and the skill and mastery that it takes to achieve a piece like that?
This is where you'd normally see the front of, this is for the front of a car, funnily enough. This is the emblem that would be placed in the front of a car, and this has been gold inlaid and enamelled. I didn't do the gold inlay, but yes. So this was quite a complex piece. So where the blue enamel is, that would have to be carved out, and then the glass enamel fired in. And then again, where the gold is, that's carved out and gold hammered in, and obviously all completely surfaced, and then it's been hand engraved on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Then I couldn't figure out what that was.
This was for the Royal Engineers. This was a piece. It was a circular base, and all these sections went around the base of this piece. I can't remember if I've given you a picture of the whole thing, but it was to commemorate an anniversary of the Royal Engineers throughout the ages. So all these different scenes were from different aspects of what they've done throughout the wars, through the century, and through the years. I don't know what else I've given you there.
Well, no, but what I find fascinating is that this is not a very big piece. I mean, how wide would it be? And we have all these
inches.
Pardon me?
About 6 inches.
Okay, so long, but what about the width would be what?
About two inches.
Okay. So this is really not very big at all. And we have this incredible detailed, we can see almost the every stone on the building. We can see the cables on the machine. We can see the details of the clothing. Do you work with a magnifier to do things like that?
Yes, so I wear an eyeglass. I don't know if you can see it on the camera.
Oh,
So
we'll look at it after. When we share the screen, we can't see you.
Yeah, so I wear an eyeglass.
Okay, well,
Louise wears a visor.
I've got that behind me, so I can show that later as well.
So what is that? Because it's got prestigious names on it.
Yes.
Did you actually see being given? I think it's a gift, isn't it?
It is. It was a gift to the Duchess of Cornwall by the Prince of Wales. Was it? No, sorry. No, it was a gift to them from, as you see the name underneath. This is a music box, and right. This was a very involved piece of work. On the top, you can't see in this photograph now, but there is an enamelled painting of Highgrove, which is their favourite royal residence. And the flowers on the top are cornflowers, and around the sides, delphiniums, and they are the Duchess of Cornwall's favourite flowers.
Right.
And yeah, it's rather beautiful piece.
Mm-hmm. When you open it, it plays the Duchess of Cornwall's favourite song, I think.
Right.
It did, didn't it? I don't know if you said that. Sorry.
So now, Louise, we are moving to your work. This is the drawing that you did, I think, for your masterpiece. And oh, we skipped the masterpiece. Oh, sorry, there's no photo of the masterpiece. I apologize. I thought I had it. I'm so sorry. But I think that Sam, sorry, I'm having a little. Here we go. Sam, I think that you have the piece itself with you, don't you?
I do. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it with the reflections, but
yeah. So it's very detailed engraving. I'm so sorry. I don't. Yeah. So how long did it take you, Louise, to do that piece?
It took me about, including the design time, it took me about 400 hours.
400 hours.
Yeah. So you start with the initial design process, which is the picture that you showed. That was my first draft of where I was going to position everything.
Right.
And then before I'd done that, I'd done like a big mood board of all the different animals. I had to do a lot of research because I wanted it to be accurate, to have the correct flowers and animals for each season as well, because I'd hate to spend all that time on it and for someone to point out that roses aren't available in summer or something silly like that. It would have been very annoying. So I did lots of research for that, and after the initial draft was all drawn, I started thinking about what kind of shape I wanted the piece to be.
Right.
And so I thought, practically, I was thinking, well, I want to put more animals on around the bottom. So I made the base wider than the top so that it went up like this, as you'll see when Sam holds it up. So that was also it's a nice shape, as well as being practical in that's the one.
Yeah, no, really.
As well as being practical in fitting more animals in.
Right.
And then after your designs draw up, you have to start drawing it on, which is terrifying, but not as terrifying as when you first start engraving it.
Yes, you spoke about the fear of that first strike. Right?
Yeah, I always feel like, because if you do it wrong, you feel like you've just ruined the whole thing and you want to start again. Obviously, that's probably not the case, but that's how it feels. And I quite often, Sam can verify this, I quite often say I've ruined something, and actually I haven't at all.
Isabel says, we engineers say measure twice, cut once. So here you are.
Yes, exactly. So to echo that, we kind of have the same thing, which is why when we initially put the design down, we only plasticine it down, so that if you do have any lines or anything you want to change, you can just rub them out, because it makes like a greasy film line. And then after that, you can scribe it on with a fine scratch line, very fine, so that if that's then wrong, you can easily polish it out. And then that's when you do the first cut, which is why it's so scary.
Now you do a lot of very detailed, incredible, highly skilled work, but you don't have a brand. And when we spoke earlier, Sam, I asked you if you had a mark, and you said, I don't know. Which in a time like ours now, when we are, everybody is branding themselves. It's all about building your brand. It's all about telling the world about your brand. To have such a highly skilled profession that takes so much work and study to get to the top, and you don't even, nobody knows who you are. Nobody realizes the incredible value. Talk me through that a little bit.
I think it's because as engravers, we don't make anything. We're an allied craft. We rely on makers, silversmiths, goldsmiths to give us their pieces, which we then embellish. So for me, not making anything means I don't actually need a maker's mark.
But
I can find
wouldn't
something.
you say that without your embellishment, the piece is just not what it is? I mean, that music box, it's got a nice shape and it's got a nice color, but without your work on it, it's really not remarkable at all.
No, that's very true. So we do sometimes get asked to sign, but that's quite contentious, because a lot of the silver and the gold houses, they don't like to advertise that they use people that aren't actually in-house. So I'll get commissioned to engrave a scene, and more often than not, they don't really want you to put your name to it.
Right. And that's the same, for example, in fashion with the haute couture, or in jewelry. That is a real problem. What do you think should be done to address that? Because it's just, for a start, it's not fair.
I think they need to change the way they view it, because the gun world is very different. Gun engravers are highly, highly sought after. And in fact, in that world, you might have to, if you want to go into Holland and order your 12-bore shotgun, and you want a particular engraver to engrave it, you might have to wait 5 years. The gun's there ready, but you have to wait for the engraver, and people will wait for them. They're highly acclaimed and highly valued, and in fact, often sell the gun. And I think that the gold and silver world need to probably embrace that a bit more.
So what would happen if you get a commission and you say, I will do it, but I just want you to know that my mark will be on it? What would happen if you were to do that?
I don't know. That's a scary question.
Can you imagine?
You know, it's a bit naughty and I shouldn't admit it, but I often do hide my mark amongst the engraved piece.
Ah!
Sometimes a couple of initials that have been hidden away amongst the foliage, or you know, somewhere that you wouldn't think to find it.
Well, I think you should do it more, because judging by the comments, everybody is behind you, supporting you. Yeah, Erica says it's the same with jewelry. Often the selling house will delete the maker's mark and add their own. I mean, it is a huge issue. And I think that us as customers, we have actually, now that we are informed, we have a duty to, when we go to buy a piece like that, you know, we ask to know who really made it. And, you know, we have the power to change that too. Maybe it's something that you could discuss with the...
I think the makers are fearful, because I think as soon as you put your name to it, they're going to worry that that people are going to go to you directly. So there's a little bit of protection. I feel I have to protect the maker as well to a certain extent, because they are the ones that are bringing me the work. But it's a very difficult balance.
Yeah, but they should have their mark on it too, don't you think? They do have their mark. Or do they? What about the maker? If a maker is not in-house,
it's like an Asprey or a Garrard or whatever. I understand that they, you know, that they've given me the commission to do it, and if they'd rather me didn't sign it, then I do understand.
It's a question of trust.
Yeah. As I say, it's a tricky one. You know, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds.
We almost at the end of our conversation, and I wanted to see if anybody. We have lots of comments in here saying that it's wonderful that you're putting your initials in there, and it's a nice game to find it. Louise, did you sign your masterpiece?
I do have my own mark on the bottom, which I have only really for whenever I do a competition piece, because that's the only time we really actually make anything. So I have that on there, which shows that it's mine. So that's good. And I'd like to think as well that some people that really know engraving would probably, hopefully, look at it and think, oh, that must be Louise Sorrel's, or because in our workshop, definitely you can tell who's engraved what just by the style of everything, or just the type of cutting, really, which is nice as well.
It is nice. And Natasha says that if you get a great maker with a great engraver, the buyer has double talent within the work. It might even add value. So here you are.
I think shake off my old-fashioned way of thinking. I think Lou's got it right. You know, she's got her own mark. And I think, yeah, I think I'm going to have to be a bit more bold.
Yeah, good on you.
Definitely.
Louise, if you were given the opportunity to engrave anything you want, what would it be? What would be your dream piece?
I mean, my masterpiece probably, we literally got told to do something, whatever you like. I mean, at the beginning, I think I was very over ambitious, which Sam can also verify. But in the end, it was definitely worth all of the stress, because I still, like, quite often after you finish a piece, you don't like it. After a while, you don't like it anymore. But I still like that piece. I love it to pieces. I love all of it. Everything about it I like. So that would be my dream piece, the one I did for my masterpiece.
That's a wonderful thing. And what about you, Sam?
Oh God. Well, I've not really had many opportunities, because I've worked so long, from the age of 16, on other people's pieces, and all the competitions that I've and all the pieces I've won for the Cartier. all been jobs that have been given to me. And so I suppose it would be really rather lovely to do a masterpiece like Lou. Think, what would I actually like to have in my own home? And funnily enough, I was thinking about this today. And yeah, and it would be wonderful to have a collaboration with a silversmith and really, you know, create something and engrave something just for me. That would be rather lovely. I don't know if I've got the time running the business at the moment, but maybe when I'm a bit older and reduce my hours working, I can do it as a sideline.
That's great. We have two questions here. Can you address how you protect your muscles and joints and posture and positions and isometrics involved in engraving over a lifetime of work? And the other one, there's a question about engraving guns. So why don't we start with the posture and then we'll come back to engraving guns.
I've always been very aware of that. I'm quite tall. I'm 5'8", and I've always my master had very rounded shoulders, which I really didn't want to have. So I've always been very conscious of my position, my seating position, to always make sure my chair is very low, and that my back is always straight. And it's just stayed with me since I started when I was 16. So I still have quite a good straight posture. But just a normal chair, you know, a normal office chair that goes up and down, so I can adjust it to different job heights. But I always try to maintain my straight back.
So Isabel is asking, what is the logic and history for engraving guns? Isabel, do you want to maybe unmute yourself and expand on the question?
It's really just a general question. It doesn't make the gun perform any better, so it's obviously to make it look nice. Is that why they do it?
Yeah, I think it was purely decoration, and also I think to disguise the bangs and bumps that it would get out on the field. You know, so that they weren't so apparent, and it's just developed from there. And then also to personalise. A lot of people have their own dogs engraved on there. You know, it's just I think to differentiate from their friend's gun, and also different reasons. I think over the years it's developed. And great collectors. There are so many collectors of guns purely for the gun engraver, which is extraordinary.
Thank you.
And often not even shot. They're just bought to own by a particular engraver.
Thank you so much. I think we've been through all the questions. Louise and Sam, I can't thank you enough for taking part. It's been really so nice to hear your story, and clearly you have a very special relationship going on. We can see that. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. You have a great week. I hope that the sun is shining wherever you are. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.